Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. And welcome to In Her Own Words, Stories of the Ming Quong Sisters. This is a webinar put on by the New Museum Los Gatos, and we have our 4 wonderful participants and Ming Quong alumni, Emmy Brown, Janet Chang, Marieonta, and Elena Wong, who will be sharing their stories with us today. And this program is part of the Los Gatos History Project, which is an initiative at the New Museum Los Gatos to not only catalog and understand the museum's permanent collection, but to share the histories and stories of Los Gatos, especially the undertold and under-recognized stories. And so this program helps with that. We would like to thank our sponsors, the County of Santa Clara, Leonard Pacheco and Diane Roberts, the Town of Los Gatos, and the Los Gatos Community Foundation. We would also like to thank the organizations that have helped us with this webinar, either by promoting it, the Los Gatos Library, Pacific Clinics, which is what the Ming Quong Home evolved into. It's still going. The Chinese Historical and Cultural Project and the Chinese Historical Society of America. All of those organizations have helped in some way with this webinar, and they also help support the Ming Quong sisters. And before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the original peoples of Los Gatos and acknowledge that the museum sits on the ancestral land of the Ohlone, the Tamian Ohlone, and the Muwekma Ohlone people who've stewarded this land throughout the generations. We recognize their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on their traditional homeland. We pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people, past, present, and future. And this is one step towards creating a safe place for the community to learn from the past, dialogue about the present, and move forward. Okay, and so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we are going to begin the webinar by talking about the history of Ming Quong. And so we have a short video that we're going to play that one of our participants, Elena, recently recorded with KCAT. And then once that video is done, she's going to give us some more information about the history of Ming Quong. So let me do that. Let me go ahead and share my screen again.
So far.
Hang on just 1 second. Okay. Let's do that again. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Pretty good. But the story of Ming Quong starts in the background of the mission home in San Francisco down at Dina Cameron, and they rescued victims of human trafficking. And these were girls that were shanghaied or sold. And
these were Chinese Americans, right?
No, they were from China.
I did not know that
this
part.
Is 1874.
Okay.
And that mission home stayed open and did the work of rescuing victims from human trafficking up to the early 1900s. Miss Cameron, though, she was really one dynamic missionary. And what she did is she saw there was a need in Chinatown because there were children that were running loose, or they were orphans, or nobody took care of them for one reason or another.
And she focused on girls, right?
Yes, she did. And from taking care of the victims of human trafficking, she started taking up little kids, babies to about 6, 7 years old. And she took her home in Oakland in 1915. All this time, there was just so many girls coming in that she kept on running out of room. So she talked to Captain Robert Dollar, the steamship magnate at that time, to donate land to buy Ming Quong Home up in the Mills Estate area in the hills. And of course, that was growing and growing. And then she found that the Chinese community said, well, the girls need to know more about their Chinese culture, and there is a growing Chinese community in Oakland. So they moved down the hill to the second Ming Quong Home.
Okay. What number are we here in Los
We're
Gatos?
third.
Okay, so we were almost there. We were almost
just
there.
before that, when the girls in Oakland had tuberculosis or had
Mhm.
respiratory problems, she rented Sunshine Cottage, which is just down the street at 156 Loma Alta Avenue.
So I drove right by it coming up here.
Right.
Wow.
And that took care of the children that needed respiratory care.
Were we calling it Ming Quong at that point?
No, we were calling it Sunshine Cottage.
Okay.
And then this place opened up. And so in about 1936, 1937, this became the third Ming Quong Home. So the girls that lived here were preschool to 6th grade. And then when you were 6th grade, you were moved to Oakland so you could be near to the Chinese community.
None of these girls had families?
Yes, they did. We were orphans, half orphans, children of divorces.
What
Parents-
is a half orphan?
Your mother, a paternal orphan or a maternal orphan.
Oh, right.
That means
You had one
either
parent.
One parent. But there were numerous reasons because Chinese culture and society had changed, and there was a transition to becoming much more Americanized. So you can see that with all those kinds of problems, how Ming Quong, Los Gatos, and the Oakland Chinatown campus became what it was. And that was a shelter or refuge for about 400 of us. And we were Chinese, Chinese American, Chinese biracial girls, and then later on some boys.
Now, what year did you come to what is now Ming Quong Home?
Okay. Thank you, Elena, for participating in that lovely video. Would you like to speak a little bit more about the history and some of the misinformation out there about Ming Quong?
Yes, I would. And, my journey back to Los Gatos Ming Quong began when I accepted the invitation to the 2017 reunion. I was a Ming Quong alumni who had not been back for 59 years, nor did I know about the previous reunions. So this reunion was really meaningful. It was an opportunity to renew my bonds with my Ming Quong sisters. However, after the reunion, you can imagine my surprise, our surprise, chagrin, and shock when a prominent local newspaper covering the reunion had this headline: "Orphans for Young Sex Slaves, Now a Modern Treatment Refuge." Searching the internet, I found that local historians, curators, and newspaper and magazine writers and others wrote 1940, Ming Quong, a rescue home for prostitutes, an orphanage for young slaves. Presbyterian and prostitutes, 1935. All the girls had been given up for adoption or had been abandoned babies. Chinese girls who were trapped in slavery and prostitution found safety in Ming Quong. To this day, this misinformation continues to perpetrate itself and pops up over and over again from one link to another, and facts have not been checked and assumptions have been made. The false assumption that the noble work of the missionaries in San Francisco at the mission home, rescuing Chinese young women and girls from sex trafficking in the middle of the 19th century, were the same kind of female victims as the 400 plus children now entering Ming Quong in the half of the century later. These were different homes, different times, and different purposes. The writers failed to recognize the Ming Quong community had evolved from a predominantly single male population of Chinese men arriving during the gold rush, and later during the transcontinental railroad building, to a new generation of Chinese. The 20th century brought changes to the Chinese community, particularly in San Francisco and the Bay Area, where emerging first and second generation Chinese practiced or adapted to American values and culture, building schools, churches, and opening small businesses, marrying and having families. With this came the same challenges, the clash of cultures, and the societal problems as in the greater general population in the United States. There were divorces, severe conflicts in the nuclear or extended family. There were orphans, paternal and maternal orphans lacking supervision, mental, physical abuse, poverty, and unemployment, and so on. The mislabeling of Ming Quong and its alumni and misinformation generated has been hurtful, destructive, and demeaning. Our memory of Ming Quong was that it was our home, our childhood, and not an orphanage. And I'm really very grateful to the New Museum of Los Gatos and Alexandra for producing this webinar and helping us correct the misinformation and allowing us to share our stories and memories with you. I hope you will enjoy the stories, because each of my Ming Quong sisters have lived at Ming Quong at different times and under different circumstances. Alexandria?
Thank you, Elena. That was wonderful. And before we get started with the stories of our participants, I did just want to acknowledge if we have any other Ming Quong alumni here today. If you want to give a wave to the camera or acknowledge that you're a Ming Quong alumni in the chat, we would love to know how many alumni are here celebrating and participating and viewing this webinar with us. And we are very glad that you are here. Okay. And I think with that, our first speaker is Emmy Brown. Emmy, hello.
Hello, hi.
What was your family like and how did you come to live at the Ming Quong Home?
Okay, well, before I answer that, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate and tell my story. I appreciate the opportunity. There's a registry that has about 497 children listed, and I am number 297 under the name Amelia. We use Emmy as my nickname. And I came in October 26, 1946, exactly 3 years after my mother passed away due to her car accident. So going back, from the time I was born till I was 3 years old, I had a very stable home life. My mother and father came from Hong Kong. My mother lived with my aunt. They were citizens of the US because my grandfather was a citizen during the gold rush time. My father had to leave and apply to come in as an immigrant. And unfortunately, he was due to come back a week before the car accident took my mom's life. So that's why I ended up at Ming Quong Home, because my dad for 3 years tried to take care of me. He took me away from my aunt. She wanted to keep me because I had a stable home life that I knew, and he said no, he wanted to take care of me. So for 3 years, We started in Palo Alto at a doctor's home. And I can't tell you how many daycares I'd been in, from Palo Alto to Glendale, living with the family, back to Palo Alto. Finally, in 1946, my dad was working at Stanford Convalescent Home, where he found out about Ming Quong Home from a woman who worked there. So that's when I entered, and I have no memory of the day my dad brought me. I have no memory whatsoever. Nothing. I don't know what I was feeling. I don't know what transpired when he dropped me off and left. But that's how I ended up coming to Ming Quong Home, and I stayed there 2.5 years till May 2000. Let's see, May 28th, 2000, 1940, and not 2000, till 1949.
Great. And what was it like living at Ming Quong? What do you remember about your years in Los Gatos?
Yeah. Well, over the years, I didn't think much about Ming Quong Home, except when things came up like on my medical records, did you ever have an operation? Then I remembered I had my tonsils out while I was living there. I had chickenpox while I was living there. I have a lot of memories of the estate and the grounds and some of the things that I did, but unfortunately, I had no memories of my sisters, of the women, the girls that I lived with. I remember how the estate looked, the beautiful grounds and outdoor fresh air, the monkey bars, the redwood trees, the concrete walkways along the stone wall where we had our little gardens. I actually had a garden where I grew radishes. I was so proud of that. When my dad came, I couldn't wait to show him the radishes. He would visit me on all his day offs. I remember the bedroom. It was a porch in the main building. I think there were 5 of us. I had the bed to the far left near the stairway. All of us had chores that we had to do. Mine was to sweep the front porch, where I was introduced to this black, ugly spider called the tarantula. The staff, the only staff people I remember, one was Miss Hung Ming Chu. She was our guardian, and she was in charge of our group, and she was extremely strict and stern. In fact, most of us were kind of afraid of her because she did not tolerate disobedience. She actually gave us tough love. She imposed very, very strict Christian values and rules, and we were punished if we disobeyed. She did teach us a lot of moral values, responsibilities. And I feel like during that time with her, I received a structure, a regimen, a stability to my life that I didn't have with my dad, because again, from one daycare to another, and most of those daycares were not very caring. I don't have very good memories of most of that. The only other staff member that I actually remembered, but her name was Louise B. Hayes. She was a senior lady. And I just remembered she was like a kind elderly lady that lived in another section of the Ming Quong campus. And she would invite us to her room. She had this big brass tray with little Chinese figurines, and she had a little mallet that she would hammer, and these little figurines would dance around. And once in a while she would tell stories. So, but those were the only people that I actually remembered. I don't remember Miss Reber, the cook. There's just quite a few people that I don't remember. I have many memories of playing with the other girls, but again, I didn't remember their names. Okay, we played on the monkey bars. We had our baby carriages, and we played doctor and nurse and climb redwood trees. Let's see here. We would all go to school together. I was there during 1st and 2nd grade. So after our morning chores, we'd all run down the hill, cross over the highway, and go down to the elementary school. But again, no memories of who these people really, who these young girls that I lived with were. I do remember that we were taught a lot to be kind and nice to each other. And some of that has stuck with me over the years. One of the young women, Vicky Lee, she told me that I was her best friend when she arrived. She came every summer when her parents went to China. And she was telling me that I told the other girls, stop picking and being mean to Vicky. You know, she was a new kid on the block, be nice to her. So I do remember that we tried to be there for each other. And the other thing, we hated to get each other in trouble, because if one person got in trouble, sometimes all of us got in trouble. So this is where you kind of learn to be kind and compassionate, because you cared about the other girls that live there. I had my tonsils out, and I also had chickenpox. And during one of those times, both times I was quarantined in a cottage, and I missed the trip to the snow country. So you know what happened? They brought me the snowballs back. So the snow country came to me, and I was very, very touched by that they remembered and thought to bring me frozen snowballs since I couldn't go on the trip. My dad took me out of Ming Quong Home in 1949 in May, when his older brother in Panama, the country Panama, not Panama, Florida, offered to take and raise me in their home. So I went down there for third and fourth grade. The experience was horrific. I mean, it was nothing that I could have imagined that it would be like. And I stayed there for 2 years. In the meanwhile, my dad remarried, and he wanted me to have a stable home. So I came back in my 5th and 6th grade. I was back in San Francisco with a new home and my new mother, and I had a baby brother. And I stayed in that environment until I graduated, okay, through 5th and 6th grade, all the way through college till I graduated and got married. But going back one brief moment, October 2004, I was at a girlfriend's house, a friend that I've had since 1956. I've never really slept at her house. I stayed at my parents' house. But in August 2004, my husband was on this trip with me, and her name was Judy. She offered us to stay at her home in the guest bedroom. And we're in the guest bedroom, and I see this book on the nightstand. And it completely changed my life, because this is a book that Nona Moth wrote about her experience at Ming Quong Home. And I said, Judy, can I buy that book from you? Or where'd you get that book? And she said, I can't give it to you. A friend lent it to me. And all I know, I don't know how long she had it in her home, but it was the first time I'd ever been in her guest bedroom. Luckily, Nona left her address of her business in Walnut Creek and the phone number. To make a long story short, I got in touch with Nona. She had a dinner for me to meet some of the Ming Quong sisters that were her age group. And then she asked me, do you want to meet the women that were in your age group? And I said, yes. So she sent an email out, and the first one to respond was Sylvia Liu. And Sylvia and Lou have become very, very close friends. She reached out, she got me together, and Dolly reached out, and Sylvia got me together with the women. Actually, we were girls then, the girls that I lived with. We were in so many photos. My dad gave me these photos, and I had no idea who they were except me. There are 5 of us on the Ding Dong Bell, posed outside a building, Easter egg hunt. And that was the year, 55 years later, that I actually reconnected, bonded with, and found all the names to all the young girls in the picture. And so for the past, I think it's 18 years, we've all become very, very close. And I'm just very, very fortunate for that.
You. And looking back on your time at Ming Quong, it was for only a few years in your early childhood, but what impact did living at Ming Quong have on your life, do you think?
Yeah, I think it had a big impact because it was during my formative years when I had no structure. because I got no structure from the daycare, no structure from my dad. It was just going from place to place to place. Ming Quong gave me a stability, and it gave me a lot of moral values and strong study and work ethics. There were a discipline, structure. I mean, I think all of those made a big difference. I've always been, from that time on, I'd always been a very good student. I've always had really good study and work ethics. I developed moral values and character that has been with me for my whole life, actually. Lifelong values that have stuck with me. And I feel that I also learned kindness and compassion toward the others as I was living there. I also learned to work with, I think I learned teamwork, because we were sort of like a team, and what one did affected the others. I became very successful in my profession. I majored in biological sciences, graduated from UC Berkeley. I also became the first woman in the Washington, D.C. area to enter the pharmaceutical sales profession, which was totally male, all male dominated. My competitors, my doctors. But to me, what was more important to me than all of the success in my profession was my family. It was really, really important for me to give my children, I had 2 children, a son and a daughter, to give them the stability at the structure that I didn't have. As a child, I went through so much adversity and difficulties. And I realized that as children, we're extremely resilient. I don't even know how I survived all this, but there must be a will somewhere to succeed, to overcome, to survive all of these hardships. And what I wanted was for my kids to have what I didn't have, which was a stable, loving home life. So what I did, I waited till, I took different jobs, but I waited till my youngest was full-time in school before I took a full-time job. And that's when I had the pharmaceutical sales job. And I picked my jobs based on how would it affect my ability to parent, because I really didn't want my kids in daycare like I was, and some of that. But I just feel that from Miss Chu, she was tough. It was tough love. But at the end, it gave me a grounding that has stuck with me all my life. And I just, let's see, I wanted to sum up. I faced so many difficulties and adversities beginning in 1943 when my mom died due to a car accident. As children, we're very resilient. And I feel that all of this has made me stronger. They say if you survive and it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. My 2 adult children, my son Eric and my daughter Denise, they have so many of my values now. They are hardworking and they're successful in their own respective professions. And they have the moral character and ethics that I feel like Ming Quong gave me. And I'm extremely proud of their professional accomplishments and how they've been parents to my 5 grandkids. And my 5 grandkids are all accomplished in their own right. And they've also have extremely good work ethics, study ethics, even though they're millennials. They do not exhibit the traits that people attribute to millennials that are, no work ethics, no study ethics, no moral value, no moral compass. This is what society has put on some of the millennials. 3 of my grandkids have their master's degree, and the youngest entered college at 16. So I just hope that I have been a role model and have passed on to my family the lifelong values that Ming Quong instilled in me for the 2.5 years that I lived there during my formative years. So that's about it.
Thank you very much, Emmy, for sharing that. Your life and your story is so interesting and inspiring, and we're grateful to have heard it. Our next wonderful speaker is Marieonta. Marie, what was your family like, and how did you come to be at the Ming Quong Home?
My family included my mom, dad, and 2 sisters. Family life with that mixture was horrible, torturous, and made my sisters and I afraid all the time. The invitation to Ming Quong Home came when the courts removed us from our family, and through Cameron House in San Francisco recommendation, we were sent to Ming Quong Home, where both parents could visit all of us in one place. In 1952 is when we were dropped off without any preparation to us. I lived at Ming Quong Home from the age of 6 years until I received my foster parents at age 17 in Utah. I think I have the longest life of living at Ming Quong Home. And I'm kind of proud. When I was growing up, I always thought, this is a wonderful life. We have outdoor facilities, and as previously mentioned, monkey bars. We had a old barn that we used to go to. The Ding Dong Well was a good gathering place for all of us. At the time that I received my foster home in Utah, I was 17 and I lived in a group home. I called it the girls' group home for lack of another name. In the group home were housed 6 teenagers who were at the time in trouble with the law. The incidents included runaways, trouble with probation officers, etc. I learned a lot of things about the law, which I probably didn't need, but I did. The home housed 6 teenagers who attended the local high school.
I mean, thank you.
You're welcome.
Spent so much time in Los Gatos. What memories do you have from living at Ming Quong and being in Los Gatos?
Well, living in Ming Quong Home was very different, as I explained earlier. They had standards. I enjoy being in the home where torture and abuse vanished. In its stead was order, kindness, and boundaries. Ming Quong Home had a permanent staff, which included a cook, her name was Miss Reber, house parents, there were a variety of them, a nurse going to school was done with military precision, strict orders and consequences. And I think that's sort of the main theme of what I got when I was a child. I learned to obey. I learned to be a model child. I learned not to speak up. I learned not to have my own ideas. I learned to march whenever they told me to march and where they wanted us to march. In a lot of ways, that was good. But in a lot of ways, it deprived me of sticking up for my own self, having a voice, whatever I might have, not being afraid to state who I was. We went to school in batches, just like Emmy said. I remember going to school and us crossing the crosswalk, and my sister happened to be in the same group that I was going to school in, and she fell. She fell in the crosswalk, and had it not been for the car screeching on his brakes, he would have hit her. but we gathered her up and we continued on to school. We always had friends, I believe. Well, I did. I was never lonely. I always had someone to play with, someone to joke with, somebody to cry with. It was kind of tough growing up and not having anybody. I'm talking about growing up into adulthood and getting married. Ming Quong did not coach us in that area. Okay.
Thank you for those memories and for sharing. Looking back on your time and all of the lessons that you've learned at Ming Quong, what impact do you think Ming Quong had on your life?
Well, since I lived at Ming Quong Home for approximately 10 years, Ming Quong Home had a great impact on my life with mostly positive guidance. We attended church regularly, sang in the church choir, gave tidings. Ming Quong concentrated on making us ladies with strict adherence to good manners and, of course, the golden rule, do unto others. I remember some of the things they stressed was when you yawn, cover your mouth. When you cough, cover your mouth. And I am surprised to see some of these things when I look around that the parents did not stress. Also, talking with your mouth full was a no-no. The negative aspect would include that I was never touched, never told I was loved, never hugged, and never encouraged to think for myself. As a result, I grew into adulthood, never sticking up for myself, never letting my voice be heard, and afraid of many things. I did grow up to have a family of 2 children, a marriage of 52 years as of yesterday, and an associate degree. I believe that I am a loving, caring, and kind person who listens more than acts, and those traits are very important to me. Okay.
Thank you, Marie, for
You're
sharing
welcome.
your reflections. And, life is full of positives and negatives, and it's good to hear both sides. Our next wonderful participant is Janet Chang. Hello, Janet.
Hi. Welcome, everybody.
Janet, what was your family like, and how did you come to be at the Ming Quong Home?
Well, my father was a merchant marine, and due to the ship's schedule, we only saw him every 2 years. My parents had 5 children, and I was the middle child and the most challenging. Originally, we lived in San Francisco, Chinatown with my grandmother in public housing. But when my father learned about the internment of the Japanese American citizens, he was outraged and quickly moved us out of Chinatown to one of the few areas that Chinese Americans citizens could purchase a home. We moved to the Bayview, Hunters Point district. My father was determined that we would speak English without a Chinese accent. The move was dramatic. We did not have a car, no friends or relatives nearby, no Chinese grocery stores, and the bus ride was almost an hour away to Chinatown. And the neighborhood was very different and even hostile. When kids would make fun of me and call me a chink, bully me, or try to steal my bike, I would stand my ground and successfully fight them off by simply popping them hard directly on their nose with my fist. By the 5th grade, I had multiple suspensions. My poor mother was so deeply embarrassed and at her wit's end. She turned to the social workers at Cameron House, located in the heart of Chinatown, and they recommended that I be placed at the Ming Quong Home in Los Gatos. Without any warning, discussion, or explanation, my mother packed my belongings and we took the long ride from San Francisco to Los Gatos. In the summer of 1959, I was 12 years old as I passed through the Ming Quong Gate. This was not Camp Winnemucca. However, the home was like a park with lots of open areas. My room was nice, and I liked playing outside on the playground and on the grassy field. I spent 3 summers and 2 academic years in Los Gatos. The summers were filled with activities: art, tennis, swimming, and baton lessons. Trips included the beach, fruit picking, church and tent camping. I was grateful for all the activities. And in fact, if I had stayed in the city, I would never have learned how to swim or twirl a baton. For the 6th grade, I attended Louise Van Meter. I was never a good student, continued my neglect of my studies, and received all unsatisfactories. For the 7th grade, I attended University Avenue Middle School. That year was quite interesting. I was able to enroll in a workshop and made a 3-shelf wall hanging. Also, I was on the basketball team and track team. Previously, no one had selected me ever for a team. I guess this was the first notice that I could be athletic. Again, without warning, discussion, or explanation, in 1961, the house mother instructed me not to go to school that day. After everyone had left for school, she told me to pack my belongings and that I was going back to my family in San Francisco. Regrettably, I was never able to say my thank yous and goodbyes to my friends, teachers, and other Ming Quong residents and staff.
Thank you, Janet. You shared a little bit already, but what was it like for you living in Los Gatos? What additional memories do you have about your time at the home?
Well, like Emmy and Marie said, life was predictable. We had a schedule, we had chores. The house mother would wake us up with a bell, breakfast in the dining hall, kitchen duty, or cottage chores. And then we would meet at the gate for the big yellow bus to take us to school. Sometimes I would purposely miss the bus and walk home with the neighborhood kids. I liked the freedom and made several friends on the way home. As the Presbyterian missionaries supported the home, we also attended the First Presbyterian Church on Shannon Road. We even received an allowance. I received 75 cents a month. I would place a dime in our weekly offering envelope. I enjoyed the church atmosphere and people. I joined the choir and joined the Bible study and officially joined the church. I recall that special day and was given a small white Bible of the New Testament with my name engraved on the cover. From my allowance, I would spend the remaining change at the local Foster Freeze. For 10 cents, I could buy a small drink and an ice cream cone. Sitting on that blue picnic bench, it was one of my many happy moments. Living at Ming Quong was peaceful. No one yelled or used corporal punishment. We had 3 nutritious meals, a roof over our head. Each cottage had a TV, plenty of space and time for outdoor activities. Each September, we shopped for one new dress, and 1 new pair of shoes. The rest of the clothes came from a giant room of donated used clothes that we would search for our size and style. Holidays, especially Christmas, was festive. The living room in the main house had a huge tree with beautiful decorations. We were asked to write down a list of 10 possible things for Christmas. I just wanted a bicycle. And I rounded out the list with shoes, coat, jacket, pajamas. I received none of my wishes. Instead, I got a doll. I never liked dolls then. And when I received this particular doll, I really hated it. It was a rubber doll with one of those creepy eyes that open and shut. I took the doll and I placed its arms in the door jamb and slammed the door shut. And then I pulled and pulled until the arms were 3 or 4 times its original length. I then placed the doll on my bed pillow with the long skinny arms reaching to the foot of my bed. So nobody sent me to a psychiatrist then. So as I shared earlier, our summers were filled with swimming, art, baton, and tennis lessons. When I returned to San Francisco, there were no tennis courts in our neighborhood. My girlfriends and I decided to take the bus to the public tennis courts in North Beach and Chinatown. We met lots of neighborhood kids, played tennis until we had to take the bus home for dinner. During those summers, I became somewhat proficient in tennis. In high school, I was recruited to the tennis team. My recruitment was obvious. They needed more players and I knew how to keep score. Being part of a team connected me with others, increased my self-esteem, and helped control my impulsive emotions. In addition, tennis kept me in school. In adulthood, tennis continued to be a part of my life. In 1999, I joined USTA and played and captained many teams until 2020. With 540 matches completed, I have hung up my USTA card. Tennis played a huge positive role in my life. It gave me confidence as it was the one thing that I felt I had competency in. The years of competition taught me cooperative teamwork, how to effectively communicate. Participating on the teams provided the key lessons that life is tough, isn't always fair, and how to accept defeat. All the lessons from the court have served me well in work and life. Starting with my first lessons at age 12 in Los Gatos to today at age 74, tennis continues to be an integral part of my life. My greatest joy from tennis are all my wonderful friends that I have met, traveled with, shared our wins and losses, and many have become lifelong friends.
Great. Thank you so much. Looking back, besides introducing you to tennis, which had such a great impact on your life, what other impacts did living at Ming Quong have?
There are at least 3 examples of Ming Quong impacting my life. The first were the lessons from doing chores, completing the chores with pride as a job well done. Mrs. Reber, who was in charge of the kitchen, taught us order and discipline, as in setting a table, washing dishes, putting away items, etc. My second was from an observation of the young sisters. Marie is one of them. Cynthia, Marie, and Helen. I observe how they stood shoulder to shoulder and supported each other. When I returned to my family, I was able to see my older sister, Deanna, in a new light. Besides being sisters, we became best friends. She taught me how to cook, drive, explore the world, and we would talk every night and share our future dreams for ourselves. The third impact was a special lady named Mrs. Johnson. The first year we met in the library and played puzzles and games. The next year, she commented that my grades were not what they could be. I told her I hated school. She looked surprised and said, "Janet, did you know you were very bright? You scored 147 on the Stanford Binet IQ test." Wow, I had no idea. No one had ever said I was bright or smart or anything close. When I left Ming Quong, I returned to San Francisco. My middle school was rougher and more hostile than the elementary school. The name calling began again, and I had to stand my ground. In the 8th grade, I was harassed, spit on, and called names. As I left the classroom, the name caller followed me and kicked my legs. I turned, picked her up, threw her against the locker, slapped her hard, and then I picked up my purse and books and said, "I'll meet you down at the principal's office." My future looked grim. The neighborhood high school was rough, gangs, knives, and guns. I was scared and desperate not to attend that high school. My sister was attending a non-district college preparatory high school. I applied and was immediately rejected. I requested Louise Van Meter and Ming Quong to send my Stanford Binet IQ scores to Lowell High School. And then I composed a letter. Dear Lowell, my daughter has emotional problems, but has potential. Please give her a chance. Thank you very much, Mrs. Helen Chang. I graduated from Lowell, continued on and earned a baccalaureate in nursing, and then a master's in public health. I retired as a college professor in 2018 at the age of 70 years old. Reflecting back, I have no doubt that if I had been sent to juvenile hall instead of the Ming Quong Home, I would still be in jail or worse.
Well, thank you, Janet. And thank you to all of our wonderful participants. Oh, you got more, Janet?
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Okay, sure. In closing, our Ming Quong sisters stories were the reflection of the social, political, and cultural context of the 1940s through the 1960s. The struggles of immigrants, the discrimination of targeted populations, the power of public education, the kindness and advocacy of Donna Dina Cameron, the benevolence of the Presbyterian missionaries, the welcoming town of Los Gatos, and the safety net of the Ming Quong Home at 499 Loma Alta provided us a beneficial stone towards adulthood. I want to thank you all who contributed to our journey. Evolving from Ming Quong to Eastfield Ming Quong to Uplift and now to Pacific Clinics, they continue the work to serve children, transitional age youth, families, and adults. Their impact is immense as they offer hope to more than 15,000 individuals annually to address trauma, life challenges through their comprehensive health services, case management, health navigation, early and continuing education, housing support, and employment assistance. I want to thank Alexandra for your invitation. It has been an honor and a pleasure to participate in this webinar. I want to thank everybody. Thank you to all for your interest in listening. With kind regards, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that was important. If anyone has any questions for any of our webinar participants, Emmy, Marie, Janet, or Elena, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask them, you can. Does anyone have any comments or questions for our ladies? You all did such a good job at telling your stories. Yes. Go ahead.
She's mute.
Go ahead.
So I want to say that it's my first time learning that there was even such a home. It's just, I remember reading the Los Angeles Times before COVID happened and finding out that there were hundreds of Asian children, foster children, who could not find homes because there were no Asian families that take them in. So for children of that age, it's very exciting to be with another non-Asian family because of how young they are. And it never occurred, I mean, it's terrible. It never occurred to me that there are children like that. I don't know why. Maybe we're so stuck in our little bubble. And to know that, and to find out that there was such a home, it's astounding to me. But okay, so my question is, do you all speak Chinese today? Or, yeah, that's my question.
Okay. So in case you didn't hear, her question is, do you all still speak Chinese? And you can answer. Go ahead, Janet.
I don't speak Chinese because we moved away, but I can order food. But when I went to the 2007 reunion, it was at Oakland Museum, and the lady said, that was my first time meeting them, and the lady sat around. They sang the doxology in Chinese because they had Chinese lessons during that time. I was just blown away. So they weren't necessarily conversational, but in Chinese, because you need other people to talk to, but at least they knew certain things in Chinese. So, but that was so they tried especially in Oakland, they tried to instill the Chinese culture and language in at that time. I hope that answered your question, Taylor.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I know that it was in the news recently that a donor gave a lot of money to Stanford University to preserve the Cantonese program that was kind of axed from the budget in 2020. So and then the donor stepped in. I thought that was really remarkable. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to answer. I still speak basic Chinese. This is Emmy. I was so young at Ming Quong that I was not part of the Chinese school program because I was only in first and second grade. So I was the youngest based on the other women who spoke. But I did, once I did, my father remarried and I got established back in San Francisco. I did go to Chinese school. And then I went to Hong Kong and to my mother's village in my stepmother's village in Toi San. So, and we did speak some at home. So I speak a little more than ordinary Russian. I can speak basic, Guangdonghua. So, but it's like Janet said, if you don't have a lot of people around you to practice, I kind of move away. I live back east. So it's when I come back to San Francisco and I'm in the Chinese community, it comes back.
This
Elena.
is Marie. I never did learn to speak Chinese. I have a faint memory of being in Ming Quong and sitting at a couple desks and they were trying to teach us. I don't think the school lasted a long time because I don't remember going a lot. But I do know that from my studies at regular school, I probably would have had a difficult time. So at least that burden wasn't placed on me then. Several people have asked me if I speak Chinese, and I always reply no. My sister has a different reaction to that. She thinks they are being critical and judging her. And she'll say, no, I don't speak Chinese. And then the person asking will say, why? And she always gets floored by that. And I've tried to teach her some responses that don't make her feel so bad. So my sisters and I do not speak Chinese. My father was fluent in Chinese. And just because he was that and we were not, we had a huge communication problem when Ming Quong sent us home for about a year in 1957. There was no communication. There was no woman in the house. He did not understand women's bodies or how they would have periods. It was not very good. As a result, we ran away and to Cameron House, and Cameron House sent us back to Ming Quong. So that's another part of my history that is very different from others.
Elena.
May I add something, Alexandra?
If I would say if Elena, it looks like Elena wants to answer.
Oh,
your first
sure.
question.
Go ahead. Yes, please. Mhm.
You know, I think it's interesting in this country how sometimes speaking another language is not a positive talent. And yet today in this modern world, you really have to be almost international to survive. I grew up in the streets of San Francisco till I was 11. I must have known every Cantonese swear word in 4 dialects. Okay, and I learned that if you were sent to the store or to the market and you listened to who the Chinese grocer or the butcher was, that if you spoke his dialect, you would get preferential treatment. So I used that Then when we went to Ming Quong Home, in Los Gatos, there wasn't anybody to talk to us other than sometimes I think Miss Lee or Miss Chu would come down. And I didn't stay in Los Gatos that long. But when we got to Oakland, they really did try to teach us Chinese. Most of the teaching was to the verses, the Bible verses. And you could earn 25 cents for every correct Bible verse that you could say in Chinese. I must have been a hellion because I would mimic, and I said the Lord's Prayer backwards, and boy, did I get punished. And so the other thing is we were sent to Chinese school, and the principal was very strict, but we were in the 7th grade by then, and we were dumped into the beginners class with all these little kids. So I said, well, let's go play basketball in the gym. And I said, I'm going to hit that principal with the ball and let's get expelled. And we did. So, I mean, I really appreciate what they tried to do for us. We did try to learn how to cook some basic things, but I wasn't very domesticated. So you have to almost look at the whole thing in context of what it could have been. I mean, I went back and tried to learn Mandarin when I was getting my bilingual specialist credential, and my tongue got stuck everywhere because there are what, 5 or 9 tones to the Asian languages comparing to Latin and Spanish and English, that it's really difficult to learn another language, especially if you don't have anybody to talk to, you know, and practice with.
Thank you. Taylor, you wanted to add one thing really quickly before we move on to our
Oh,
other
yes. I was just, at least there's Ming Quong on the West Coast, and the East Coast, we have what are called modern day, we call them satellite kids, meaning they're, you know, they're sent back to their grandparents' homeland because their parents work so many hours that they're not able to care for them. And when they return to the US, they have huge problems, you know, because they've been abandoned again by the parents and then by their grandparents. So when they come back to the States, they feel they're so disoriented. And that's a problem before COVID. And then now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, I wonder how many children have been orphaned by, you know, losing a caregiver during from COVID, from the pandemic. But we don't even have the institutions the institutions don't really keep track of that. So I don't really know, but I definitely, as I mentioned before, it's definitely a problem in Los Angeles. It's like hundreds of Asian kids without homes before COVID. So anyway, just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you. We had another question come in the chat. Do any of you remember the Strawberry Festival or the Christmas fair at the Presbyterian Church?
Well, I remember the Strawberry Festival because I lived in Los Gatos, and I think many of the other ladies moved away. So I came back to the Valley, and I was a volunteer in this Chinese women's club, Chinese American Women's Club. That was called. And we had a cookbook, and we started a Chinese language school. So I sent my daughter there. But so every year we were, I was a volunteer preparing it, selling all these things. And then at first it was at Ming Quong, and then later on it moved down because it got so big. It came down to the town center. And then, well, they just realized that even though it was fun, it always came out in the negative. So that was it. But it was a fun activity that the town would participate in, and it brought people to that campus. Yeah, but that was fun. A lot of people remember that one.
I remember the Strawberry Festival. I did not participate in it, but it was such a huge thing. You had to be blind and deaf not to know about it. So it was positive. We saw a lot of our friends from the church and from the school and their parents and their siblings. So that's what I remember.
Great. You can go ahead and unmute Maisha if you would like. I saw your hand raised earlier.
Oh, sure. I wasn't sure of the rules, so thank you. I have so appreciated hearing your powerful stories and history. This is a rich history that I am learning about. I bought the 2 books, so I can't wait to read them. But I have 2 questions. The first one is, which one word would you use to describe your experience at Ming Quong? So I'll start with that one, and then if there's time, I'd love to ask the next question. So one word to describe your experience.
Safe.
Warm.
I would say stable.
Yeah.
Security.
Yeah.
Comfort.
Thank you. And then the second would be, is there a common misconception about Ming Quong Home that you would like to correct?
That's a real good question, because quite honestly, I was so busy with my career and moving up, and I did become an associate superintendent of the 14th largest school district in California. But when I went back and saw what they wrote, it just blew my mind. I said, how could you misinterpret what happened in the early 19th century to where we are in the 20th and 21st century when we lived there, and we really needed help. And I have to say this, people keep on asking me, well, how did it feel to be abandoned? I never felt abandoned, because the home was so wonderful, and I was so neglected before going into the home, that it was like a whole new life that opened the doors for me. And there were so many kind people that supported the home, that we got so much in terms of growth. I always knew I was bright, but I also knew I was quite precocious. And it taught me to moderate being precocious and focus on learning. And I truly, that library and all the Nancy Drew books that I read, it was just so much fun. And I had great teachers in Los Gatos. And I'm sorry to say that wasn't the same when we went to Oakland, because if you were quiet, you were a good student in Oakland. In Los Gatos, you had to think, you had to ask questions, you had to participate, and it was a whole different world.
Yeah, so I'd like to say something to answer that question. For me, I think the misconception that this was just an orphanage, and as Elena said, not only an orphanage, but for children of prostitutes, etc. That is definitely not true. And I never felt abandoned, and that's the other thing. My dad supported me. He paid every month. Some people were abandoned, but I wasn't. So I did not feel abandoned. He saw me every day off. He either walked the grounds with me, or he took me out and then brought me back that day. So for me, I wasn't abandoned. My whole life, if my mother had not died, would have been totally different. It wasn't because of sex trades or trafficking. So I feel that it was not a place that you went to because you were abandoned or not wanted. It could be for others, but it wasn't for me. And I found it very stable where I didn't have to go to a different daycare, every 6 months or something. So it was a stability for me and a place that I could flourish for those 2.5 years.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm with Pacific Clinics. I saw someone else with Pacific Clinics as well. And so just learning this rich history has been so amazing for me. And thank you for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
1 second, Taylor. I have a question. So these misconceptions, do you ladies have any ideas for what we can do to help correct those misconceptions? Like any actions that we can try to take to help you in your effort to combat the misinformation?
I think that a lot of people, when I tell them my childhood was spent in an orphanage, they have this preconceived idea that was like, what is it, that movie Annie, that you'd have, oh gosh, how did you survive? And I tell her it's not bad. It's not what you think, because the word orphanage conjures up different opinions from different people, and rarely is it what it is. Like they say, it is what it is. But I think our contribution to society and to our community and to our friends is to correct that stigma, and also to let them know that the product of the orphanages are mostly positive, that we didn't land up being crooks, we didn't land up being in jail, we did not have a drug problem, a substance abuse problem. I think all of that was sort of drummed in our heads when we were little and growing up. That is not the thing to do. So I believe some of us picked up that message, and also it closely aligns to our religious affiliation. If you think about religion and you think about all these things that are pulling society down, religion tries to bring it up, and they'll probably say, don't start it. If you're thinking about doing this and your bones tell you that it's not right, don't do it. So that's my input on this last question about correcting the image that an orphanage brings, because I think most people do not know what an orphanage is. So what they pick up is what they see on TV. And in short, what we can do is we can help them realize that's not the truth.
I just want to say one thing. As a child, when like I said, I don't remember my father bringing me there, but I do remember him telling me that I was going to a boarding school, like a boarding home, like the rich kids get sent to a school. So in my head, the word orphan, even though I, quote unquote, a half orphan, I never thought of myself that way. I thought of myself being raised by a single parent who could not manage. And I actually had those thoughts, in the 2nd grade, that my dad can't manage me alone, so he's putting me in a boarding school. So in my head, the word orphanage with Ming Quong I never thought of it as an orphanage, no matter what the description. So for me, it was always a boarding school. That's my take on it.
Go ahead, Elena.
I just like to make some research clarification. Ming Quong was listed in the California Biannual Reports of Charities as an institution, and it was listed like a children's home. took her home, which was before Ming Quong, was called an orphanage. And when you talk to Nona Mock, she says it was in the writing of the books, her books, that the publishers were calling it an orphanage. It's very hard to explain it as a home because you've heard our stories. We were disciplined and all that, and it was structured, but it was a home for us and not an orphanage because very few of us were really adopted. I didn't get adopted till I was almost 18 years old, and I had been out of the home. So that's one misconception. The thing that we are doing now, which is so great, is it just seems like the door opened and the social services group, starting with Uplift and the Chinese Historical Society, are letting us do these webinars so that you can contrast and see what was said to what we really are. And I have to tell you that when we had the rededication of the gate, one of the ladies said, that was Asian, said, you know, I had heard those stories. I didn't know where the girls came from, but yeah, I remember they were the bad girls. And Nona writes about in her book. And so webinars are fine, but we still have a long ways to go to correct. And you know, internet today, you know, you can't believe half of what's on there, right? But how do you fight something that just constantly keeps on changing? I think we need Asian studies, for example, to grow this. Groups like your organization who are talking about the minorities and some of the things. We're not accusing, you know, people that they were mean or they're prejudiced, but what they don't know, they're acting because they don't have good information. And we need more help to get this published because sometimes word and mouth, it just goes crazy. You know, the rumors go on. And I remember being called a mutation. And let me give you the logic of the mutation. I was standing at the gate of the campus and I met this young lady the day before, and I was going to my tennis match, and she said, "Hi, you're a mutation." I said, "I guess so. What are you talking about?" And she says, "Well, you were adopted by white parents, but you came from Ming Quong Home, so you must have been a prostitute's child. And so you're a mutation." And I said to myself, boy, she learned a new word, mutation. I think she got what was going on in biology mixed up with what real life is about. But that's the kind of crazy stuff that happens. And misinformed college professors have sent their students to research Ming Quong as an orphanage. And they then tie up the history of the mission home and forget what Ming Quong Home was about. So that's what needs to be corrected.
Great, thank you. There was some discussion in the chat about the restoration of the arch, and yes, the Ming Quong arch at the 499 Loma Alta campus has recently been restored. You can go see it. And also thank you, Maisha, put the link to the video of the rededication ceremony. I think we maybe have time for one more question. Taylor, I know you've had your hand raised.
Thank you. In doing research on Ming Quong, I came across Bernice Bing Lee, who's
Renowned artist.
yes. Are there other I guess alumni that's equally as distinguished as sorry, go ahead. Mhm.
Does somebody want to answer that, or should I? It's interesting because we have doctors, medical doctors, we have teachers, we have head of nursing, Janet. We have a lot of people that have succeeded, and among the different generations of us. But even during the days of the mission home, there were two prominent doctors that came out of the mission home that came back and served the Chinese community in San Francisco and the children's nurseries at that time while they flourished in their practice in San Francisco. And when you look at the struggles they had to go through, because if you're talking about going to school and being a medical doctor in the early 1900s, can you imagine the prejudice of no women, and then on top of that, a Chinese woman? It really is amazing what we've accomplished. Does that answer your question?
Does. I mean, I teach myself Asian American history, and it's astonishing how accomplished the early immigrants were. It's astonishing. It is so little known, but as I come across, these figures, I'm so amazed. It never ceases to amaze me how much they accomplish, perhaps even more so than present day, which is surprising.
Also, as we'd mentioned in the chat, Nona Mock-Wyman was a Ming Quong alum who wrote 2 books, Chopstick Childhood and Bamboo Women. But I think, as Elena said, I think all of the Ming Quong ladies, became accomplished in their lives in their own ways. Okay, if no one has any other questions, thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to hear the stories. And again, so much thanks to Emmy, Elena, Marie, and Janet for sharing your stories and helping bring this part of Los Gatos history to life.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.